Hello and welcome to Manibil. This is a follow-up to my presentation on my ontology, and I might want to clarify a few things. And one comment says that it might be, even though I found I was actually quite satisfied with the presentation I ended up with. It's sort of maybe not the easiest topic to tackle for anybody. So getting sort of a complete overview of your ontology, and this might not be actually completely complete, actually fully complete. What do you say, right? But it's at least a good part of it, and at least all of the beginnings of it, right? What I'm very concerned with is always, how do you start? Where do you get that start from? How do you get to it? Where does it come from? Right? And if you can't say where it comes from, you're probably close to where it starts, right? It's like the reduction base should be that which the starting point of your philosophy must be established, at least, right? You have to establish something where you say, this is where I start. This is the starting point, right? Otherwise, I will not take it seriously. I will consider that you're just coming up with shit that you want. You're following a narrative rather than rigid philosophy, right? So, and it has to be crystal clear what you're doing. And also, another part I find very important is, if I want to establish an external world of some kind, in some way or another, and I establish other beings that are similar to myself, right? If I want to interact with these individuals, I cannot be the guidance of their being. They have to be their own control mechanism, because that's what I'm doing. I'm coming up with my ontology. I am presenting my philosophy. So I cannot be the one telling other people how they should understand themselves. First of all, I don't have access to it in any case, right? And the other thing is, I would contradict my own philosophy, because I was establishing my philosophy and then starting telling potentially somebody else how I understand my experience and my ontology, right? Therefore, it would be a contradiction to say you have to follow my ideas. I don't even know if there's anything out there, right? So, what I'm getting to is, if what I can establish completely by myself has to be similarly establishable by somebody else if I go the route of an external world with other beings and so on, right? And it's implicit in me sitting here talking to you that I'm probably working from that axiom, right? That there are some external world where there's something going on that I don't have access to. But I'm trying to communicate it with it using my experiences, right? It from the standpoint of my experience. I don't want to get into, I've discussed this before, so you know where I'm going or what I mean by it, right? But if I talk about, for instance, qualia, if I extend that, I'm sitting here presenting my philosophy and my ontology, right? The other individual need to independently of me be able to understand and experience that same thing without me telling them what they're experiencing. And maybe it's difficult to, sort of a little convoluted, right? But if I say red, I don't have to explain to another person what red is. They inherently understand what I mean, right? And it takes, of course, if somebody has, colorblind, right? They don't understand exactly what red is, right? And they might have sort of an imagination of what it might be, but what would that be? They have never experienced the color red. So there are some gray areas in that sense, but that doesn't that there's a gray area with, for instance, colorblind people doesn't mean that the general idea doesn't work, right? But if we leave the colorblind people as a specific problem alone, those who can actually experience color, I would say that if I can experience color, that individual can also experience color. And the point is, they don't need me to tell them when and if and what it is to experience color. And the same goes with the next category, which is cognitions. If I say that's an elephant, I don't need to explain or extend some kind of philosophy or I have to explain to you what it is. They just have to, whatever it is, turn in that direction and look, so to say. And then they can say yes or no, right? If it's more convoluted than that, then you are presenting yourself as the master of reality, right? To paraphrase Black Sabbath, right? You are the one saying, yes, I understand, but I'm explaining my understanding in a way that is not necessarily completely not intuitive, self-evident to you, right? Self-evident is not the best term either, but I'm lacking a good term here. That is sort of independent. If I say elephant, you don't need further clarification of what I mean, right? Because if I'm doing it more complicated than that, then I'm saying, imagine this or imagine that. Then I'm not appealing to your direct experience in accordance with my own understanding of my own experience, right? Then I'm sort of saying, you have to sort of live life through me and my understanding, right? I don't like that because it's a narcissistic approach, right? It's I am the master of reality, so to say, right? You have to ask me how to understand things, right? We can't meet on an even ground, and the reason why I say this is, if we're talking about knowledge, and further down the line we're talking about ethics, we have to be in some fucking agreement about what is going on. Then I cannot be the one telling you how this is. And what about all these 7-8 billion other people that I'm not talking to, right? Everybody have to have a ground floor that is even, right? At least it's possible to agree upon this being an independent part of your phenomena that you don't need to explain to somebody else. And I would say the first categories, A and B, please go and look at my previous presentation on ontology, right? Which is sort of this is merely just a somewhat more clarified version of that, right? That category A, color, sound, smell, touch, and taste. And category B, which are the cognitions from the qualia, which is, for instance, Earth, or Eiffel Tower, or Beaver, or, computer, arm, ocean, whatever, right? Something like that, where it's a direct, I want to say, mapping of the qualia. I was just lying in my bed this morning when I woke up. I don't know why. Sometimes it's like in the morning when I'm waking up, there all sorts of thinkings. Maybe it's sort of subconscious philosophizing. When I wake up, I'm in a sort of a philosophical mood already, right? So sort of half waking, half sleeping, sort of. Maybe that's the best time to philosophize. I don't know, right? But let me know what you think. That when I think about my experience, my qualia, right? There is no part of that general presentation, that 3D dashboard, as Bernardo Castro would call it, right, that isn't cognized. everything is somehow cognized. If I sit in my living room, right, I'm looking towards a wall here, and I have a music collection, a CD collection, and a vinyl collection, and a movie collection, right, and a TV screen, and my stereo, and my good old loudspeakers, right. That I cannot find anything that isn't cognized somehow, right? There are no holes in the experience, so to say. Excuse me. And that's, I think that's why it's reasonable to say that it necessarily follows that there is this direct connection with qualia cognition. These cognitions basically are just there, basically as far. I mean, there might be a little, when I think about it, when I look around upon my vision, there might be a very, very short while before I experience the colors, and then the cognitions kick in almost at the same time. But there seem to be very, very slight delay, right? And that might point in, and I'm not quite sure about it, but it seems, maybe it's just because I just looked at that shelf over there. Now I'm not looking at the shelf, but I have the memory of the shelf. So the mind is recreating the just prior experience and expecting to, it already has the cognition ready, so to say, because it expects that to be the same cognition as from when I panned away from it, right? I don't know what's going on, right? But in any case, it seems there is a slight delay from qualia to cognition, but very, very quick, right? It's almost undetectable. So close to undetectable that I'm not quite sure I'm actually right about that, right? But it would point in the direction that cognition is mapped onto the experience, right? But all of the experience is cognized. There's nothing that is not cognized, right? I struggle to find. I mean, there might be a case where, if you take, for instance, the sky, right? The sky is not necessarily only blue. There might be a cloud. There might not be a cloud. There might be an aeroplane and not an aeroplane, or a bird, or whatever, something, a stick flying around or whatever, right? What aeroplane or so on. But these are just other concepts that are sort of sliding through one concept, right? If I have the cognition of sky and there's a cloud, then cloud is just another cognition traversing through the first cognition, which is sky, right? So there can sort of be maybe cognition on top of another cognition. That's not impossible, right? Certainly not, right? Surely not. But I cannot find a hole anywhere where there's sort of, as long as there is qualia, there are cognitions. They just follow. It's almost like the mind cannot not cognize. And that might also point in the direction that cognitions are very much automatic and not necessarily correct, right? I referred to an incident I was experiencing a couple of years back when I was walking in the woods with my daughter, right? And we were walking sort of uphill through the woods. There's a fairly wide road, or what was a pathway through the woods, right? And we were walking up a hill, and the hill would, descend on the other side, and people would come towards us up the hill on the other side. And somebody came, and they had, something with them, an animal, let's say, right? And my first instinctive cognition was fox. And I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly if this animal was way ahead of them. So I hadn't any human beings cognized yet, right? But they would be cognized later, at least. But my first cognition was fox. And then very short while after, it was dog, but with the same qualia, or very similar qualia to fox. So the mind is very quick at adding cognitions to the sort of the experience, right? To the qualia. So it's more important for, let's say, the mind, right, to add some interpretation to it, a cognition to it, than not having a cognition. It would rather cognize something that might not be, that might have to change. I cannot say whether it's correct, because even if I'm experiencing loudspeaker, how would I know? Just because it doesn't change doesn't mean necessarily that it's correct, right? That would be a bit of a stretch. But the loudspeaker over there and the one over there in my stereo, right? They are there where I expect them to be, and I'm always cognizing them every day. I'm looking at them and so on. I expect them to be there. I'm cognizing. I mean, I have no reason to think that they're not there, right? But just because it has been stable all the time doesn't mean they're actually loudspeakers, right? But the point is that the mind can add cognitions that might have to change. So there is sort of a second-guessing game going on with cognitions, right? It might just be that usually the mind, let's say the mind, the faculty behind all this, right, has become so, the cognitive apparatus have become so good at predicting cognitions that they normally don't have to change. And maybe there's something about not changing the cognition. It's better not to change something than to change it all the time, right? Even if you might go wrong sometime, right? If I'm cognizing that as a fox, but it has to change to a dog, it's better that I think it's a fox and I defend myself than thinking it's a dog that is actually a fox, right? So there's a built-in sort of rationalization, a sort of a, maybe you could say, I hesitate to say it's sort of a Darwinian kind of approach, but it's better to, it's the old, there's so many things that can go wrong, but only one thing that can go right, right? There's so many things to be scared of, but there's very few things that sort of is not scary, right? So it's better to be freaked out about something and react to it, and then later find out, okay, it wasn't that. You know, it's also the old story of, you know, the wolf guy or the sheep guy saying, "Hey, there's a wolf," and everybody comes running, right? And next time he says, "Hey, there's a wolf," and he's using the fear scenario, right? And the third time they don't come, then they don't fear the wolf anymore, right? Because it's full of shit, possibly, right? And as you know, Ricky Gervais says, the morality of that story isn't that you shouldn't cry wolf. You just shouldn't cry wolf 2 times in a row, right? You should cry something else. The dinosaurs are coming, right? Okay, but these are just sort of brainstormings around these aspects, right? They may need some further clarification, right? I hope that you understand the distinctions between, for instance, qualia and cognition. That Eiffel Tower, for instance, is not a qualia. It's basically, maybe you could say, a set of scopes of qualia, right? There's certain sounds, there's certain colors, there's certain smells and tastes and touch. Maybe not who has tasted the Eiffel Tower, right? But you know what I mean. It depends on the object, so to say. It's a set of qualia that are usually engulfed in the cognition of Eiffel Tower. It's very weird, this cognition thing, because it's like it isn't there, right? if I try to imagine the Eiffel Tower, what I'm imagining is basically a photograph of the Eiffel Tower, right? It's sort of I'm sort of painting a structure, and the roads and the scene behind it or whatever, right? And the sort of the shape of it and so on, and the color, I can imagine the sort of a rusty red or whatever the color is, right? And I might even be wrong about that, but that's what I'm imagining, right? Imagining. So it's kind of weird, because if I try to recall the idea of the Eiffel Tower, there isn't a Eiffel Tower, in my opinion, that arrives like that. It's close, I would say, right? But it's almost like I am repainting it in my mind. When I think about it, right? When I see the Eiffel Tower, very quickly, it's not like it's there. It's like I'm sort of building it in my mind quickly, right? I'm putting in other kinds of objects, maybe a road, maybe some trees, maybe a sky, maybe a river, maybe some houses and some structures. I'm very quickly sort of rebuilding the idea. But what is going on in the cognitive apparatus behind it, I cannot really get to. It seems very ghostly and almost not there, right? But when I re-establish the idea of the Eiffel Tower, then it's very quickly established using some imaginative power of some kind, right? So, these are just my thoughts, right? Okay, so what I have added to the ontology this time is a few things I want to get across. And I have rearranged the noumena and the phenomena, so we have this trickle-down idea, right? When somebody is talking metaphysics, they are talking about ontology concerning noumena, right? They are extending the ontology of phenomena to also explaining the ontology of noumena. And usually, because otherwise why would they do it? Usually, how it is responsible for the phenomena. It's very important to understand what is going on when people talk metaphysics. Metaphysics, in my opinion, is ontology of noumena. I can't get to that. I can maybe screw around with my mind because I want to. I feel that I need to go there and explain why there are colors and sounds and smell and taste and touch, right? But how could I possibly, right? Because, first of all, usually people say, I don't have direct access to noumena. It's because it is outside phenomena. So that's why I put this very thick line between noumena and phenomena up there, right? It's because, as Bernardo Castro would say it, I am dissociated from it. I am decombined from it. Whatever fuck the term is, right? And then he will proceed to start to talk to you or tell you about how it's composed, how it's put together, how it works. The ontology of noumena. That is metaphysics. I don't buy any of that, right? I don't buy any claim of understanding of what goes on before I have phenomena. I only have my phenomena to work with. And all that I can do is some kind of abstraction from A and B, right? Which is the reason why I have created these categories to the right, called experience and then consciousness, quote, insperience, right? May need some further clarification, and I've created a layer between B and C called awareness, because the awareness is, and it may need a further clarification, a further philosophy, right? But it's sort of a work in progress, this. Because I'm not in control of any of the qualia and cognitions, I can only be aware of what is going on, right? And you can say that maybe emotions and other things like that, emotion, feelings, desires, are not something I'm necessarily in control with, and I might go with that, right? There might be I might need to have just below awareness a category called emotions and feelings and desires, and then further down the line maybe, or maybe it has to be split up in two sidelining categories, whatever, something like that. But it's not really important to get this across, because I'm looking basically at the deeper end of it, in the A and the B and the distinction with the rest, right? That's why I'm saying, because I can't control, or I'm not in control, and I don't necessarily want to control, right? The qualia and the cognitions, I can only be aware of them. But the awareness of it creates consciousness. The A and the B are the experience. And I've used the term experience for everything, but that should be called phenomena. That's a better way of putting it, in my opinion. That makes more sense in the general way of using these terms. Experience, there's something outside, beyond, sort of, right? So it's sort of, maybe it's a dangerous territory to use these kind of terms. But, bear with me here, right? I'll get to it. That these things, A and B, that I'm not in control of, are experiences that I'm aware of. And that awareness creates the rest, right? The awareness of things going on in the experience creates all sorts of imagination. It creates a reality. It creates theories, emotions, ethics, mind, matter, ripples, principle, ethics, metaphysics, ontology, schooling, promise, memory, and so on. You can keep going with this, right? And further subcategorizing each, philosophy is metaphysics is part of philosophy. So maybe there needs to be further classifications within these abstractions, right? It's a huge thing, right? There are possibly thousands of different cognitions and subcognitions, right? Like I can experience a cow and a horse, but they both have legs. So there are sort of subcognitions called legs that are identical to different kinds of other cognitions. So there may be subcognitions and so on, or sub-concepts and subconcepts to subconcepts and so on, right? There are toes on a foot, which is on a leg, on a horse, whatever. Oh, they don't have feet, but you know what I mean, right? It's a fucking weird horse, right? Freaky horse. So I like to keep these things apart. What I'm aware of and what the awareness creates. Awareness is not a category as such. It's more like a philosophical barrier between what I call experience and consciousness. The awareness creates consciousness, which is the rest of the phenomena, right? As I say, imagination, reality, theories, metaphysics, ontology, schooling, ripples, the idea of schooling, for instance, right? The principle of schooling, for instance, or memory, or reasoning, philosophy, and then some more important things, dreams, right? These are phenomena. I have to be aware, right? Dreams are always something. I dreamt about the Eiffel Tower and whatever, an emotion maybe I had with the Eiffel Tower. But it's all something that is abstracted from prior experiences somehow, right? And qualia and cognition, and mostly cognitions, and maybe some feelings and desires and sort of all of those under subconscious stuff that is added to the story of dreaming, right? But it's all in the category of abstraction, in my opinion, right? And there's this sort of the subconscious and the psyche, right? And there's a reason why I have highlighted them and made them red. And I've also highlighted philosophy, but kept it black, right? And also you could say I call the consciousness insperience, because that is a way to sort of put words on the difference between experience and consciousness. Consciousness is an insperience. That's personal to me, right? One way to talk about is that all of the category C and further down the line these are particular to me. But I can agree with somebody on the Eiffel Tower. I can talk to somebody else and say, let's talk about the Eiffel Tower. I cannot really say, let's talk about my emotions, right? They don't have an idea of my emotion. They might say, yeah, well, when I looked at the Eiffel Tower, I felt this way. And they may identify the same kind of thinking, but it's sort of the road goes through a cognition in order to say, yeah, I understand. When I ate that cake, it tastes good, right? Yeah, I like strawberry cake, right? When you say strawberry cake, somebody else can identify the passion or the taste or the emotional reaction to the taste of this and that. But it has to go through cognitions and qualia, right? In order to get to the emotion. So in order to identify a similar emotion in somebody else, I cannot just talk about the emotion. I can't put words to it. I have somehow to go through cognitions and qualia, right? Okay, so in the category C, where I have written philosophy in black and dream, subconscious, and psyche in red, is because I put them very close together. I think that when we get down to the deeper ends of philosophy, we're talking metaphysics or idea of reality or ethics, all these things, it's very close mentally to what else is going on in your mind and the psyche and the subconscious and dreams and whatever. So I think that maybe dreams should have been put to the side here, but the subconscious and the psyche, it very quickly, philosophy becomes about what do I want to be, right? As I forgot to mention, there's a quote up there just below the headline, Ontology, which is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's called Plato Stanford something, right? Which says about ontology, it's the study of what there is, right? Is in my opinion not the best way to put it, but it's a description of the phenomena, right? It's a description of my phenomena, and if you did an ontology, it would be a description of your phenomena, right? Nobody says it has to be the same as mine. I can't tell you what, right? But I would, be inclined to say, but if it's very different from mine, I would think that either you're bullshitting me or there's something malfunctioning about you, right? So that I have to sort of rest in some kind of adherence to my own philosophy. That's why I did it, right? I want it to be correct and good philosophy, but I don't want to just because somebody else said, hey, I don't trust this. And I would say, oh my God, no, I have to go with, no. It's my ontology still, right? It has to be from my standpoint. Stanford says the study of what there is. But it very quickly becomes infected with what I want to be there. It's not philosophy and ontology and metaphysics and all this. It very quickly, when you listen to people talking about these aspects, right? When you read between the lines, it very quickly, the way they argue and so on, it becomes something that is closer to this is what I want to be there, because it makes me feel good. It gives me these kinds of emotions, and it takes away my fear of this and that, or my anxiety, or whatever, right? And it lines with what mommy told me when I was 10 years old and so on. All the bullshit she probably told you, right? In order to control you. It does. The fear of ostracization from other individuals, particularly your parents, has a stronger effect on your philosophy, potentially, than your will to be neutral and go wherever it leads you, and be very strict always that you don't inflict your philosophy with what you want to be there, but what is actually there, right? And one way to see this is that if if people talking about metaphysics don't say, yeah, let's wait a bit with that metaphysics things. Let's start with ontology and talk about what is actually there before we try to second guess what is beyond what is there. Then they're going very quickly into this is what I want to be there in order to explain what is there, right? But that's putting the cart before the horse, right? Or putting their own psychology before good philosophy, right? So I would say if somebody talking about these ends of philosophy, they jump basically straight into metaphysics, they are trying to fool you, right? They are either not aware that they're bullshitting, or they're actually aware that they're bullshitting. I think the first one is the most common, right? But it's based on psychology more than on rigid, pure philosophy, right? I'm trying to get rid of bad thinking. Most of philosophy, I have realized, is actually getting rid of bad thinking. It's not about all this, what if this is the case, and what if this, and what if that, and so on. No, all the what ifs are just bullshit, right? Stick to what you've got, and we might be able to agree on it, right? But that's why I put the philosophy and subconscious and psyche very close together down here in category C, right? And also because experience is so settled and quick and mundane, everyday sort of thing, right? What philosophers are usually doing is roaming around down in category C of abstractions and finding some weirdness. Oh, ripples. That's very abstract. Maybe there are ripples that are responsible for color, right? It's this kind of abstraction leaps. They roam around in abstractions and then come up with all sorts of things that might be before all that which were actually responsible for these kinds of abstractions, right? Like ripples. A ripple is an abstraction from an ocean, and the ocean is a collection of colors and sounds and smells and touch and tastes, right? So how the fuck could a ripple be responsible for a color, right? And then they can say, yeah, but it's just an abstraction. It's just a mental picture of what is going on. But I don't care about your mental pictures because they are exactly just abstractions. You're roaming around in abstractions, claiming them to be some kind of representation of something you don't have access to. Bullshit, right? I mean, it's like, yes, when we're dealing with the understanding, in my opinion, of cognitions, the only reasonable thing I can come up with is, why don't I just go with the colors and the sounds and smells and touch and taste? Why am I doing these cognitions? It's because, or a way to put meaning to them, is to say, and do your own thinking, right? But this is mine, that the qualia are sort of raw data. Let's say, call it raw data. That might be a better term, right? But it's the raw data. It's not sufficiently functional in order for me to have anything in my awareness to do, right? I need to cognize, or the mind has started cognizing various things like oceans and arms and computers and knobs and Eiffel Tower and Beaver and so on. And when I have that, it's sort of connected to my imaginations and my emotions and rationalization and reasoning. That's what can function. But a color is not particular to the Eiffel Tower. There might be something else that has the same color or the same sound or the same smell and so on, right? But the Eiffel Tower is the fucking Eiffel Tower, right? That cognition is either there or it's not there, right? That's why it's functional. It's either there or it's not there. That's how cognitions go, right? Either you're cognizing for whatever reason Eiffel Tower, or you're not cognizing Eiffel Tower, right? And I'm not talking about you can imagine the Eiffel Tower. I'm talking about the Humean experience or the Humean impression of Eiffel Tower, right? Okay. So maybe this becomes a little convoluted. Let me know what you think, right? But I think it's a good idea to have this in mind. This in mind. This, I will be using this henceforth when I'm dealing with clarifying what people are talking about and how they screw around with the categories, right? All of a sudden they use an invalid category to explain things they cannot use because it's a circular argument, right? So circularity is embedded in this thinking, or it is illuminated by this thinking here, right? In this ontology, you cannot, if you're using an abstraction to explain or qualify, for instance, what a color is, you are bullshitting, because it's because of colors and sounds and so on that you eventually had some kind of abstraction. And I was talking a lot of that in my prior presentation, right? But it's this this will weed out a lot of bullshit, right? I mean, if you think there's some problem in this presentation or this ontology here, let me know. And please be aware that the category C is a very big pile that may need further categorization, as I've written there, right? But I think that when we get to the abstractions, which is the catch-all term for all that, right? It's very sort of seems interconnected, or at least to a large degree or some degree, but I think a large degree, there's some interconnectedness between theories and emotions and reality, imagination and memories. It's sort of, it's a sort of interconnectedness, right? But color, sound, smell, touch, and taste, they are distinct. And they are closed off from explanation of further down the line, right? But you might, when you experience, when you hear a promise, you may have an emotion, right? Or you have a memory of an experience when you're a child and you have an emotion or a desire or a feeling, something reaction to it, right? So there's more interconnectedness in category C, but category B and A, they're very distinct, right? A color is a color. A sound is a sound. There is no relation between color and sound, right? You cannot use a sound to describe a color and vice versa, or a smell to explain a taste, right? I treat them completely distinct and unique, right? And the same goes for to some extent with the cognitions. A soft ice is a soft ice. If I cognize soft ice, I'm cognizing soft ice, no matter if it's sort of a bad tasting or good tasting soft ice, whatever. If I'm experiencing soft ice, I'm experiencing soft ice, right? That's it. It's either there or it's not there, right? You could say if my daughter draws soft ice and I say, well, that looks like soft ice, I'm cognizing soft ice, but it's not a real soft ice, right? I'm not going to say, hey, let's eat that soft ice, right? Paint one more for me. But the point is, I'm still experiencing soft ice. I'm just tricking my mind, so to say. That's what art does. It tricks the mind into cognizing things that are not really there, you could say, right? When you make a sculpture, you say, oh, that's an interesting man or whatever, right? But there is a man. It isn't a man. It's a sculpture, right? There's something that isn't quite the same as a real man or woman, right? But you're still cognizing it, and it's based on direct experience. So if I'm cognizing man or woman or whatever it is from that sculpture, I am cognizing it. Even if I say it's not a real man, an actual man in the normal, or that there's some qualia missing, right? There's something that isn't right. But I'm still cognizing it. Right? And I might go into thinkings about what does it actually take for me regarding qualia in order to cognize, right? And I might go into that in another presentation later. But you could you can take any philosophical statement of any kind and run it through this, right? Let's take Hume's Isort gap, right? What was Hume talking about? Well, what he was talking about is that when people establish the being of a god or whatever, right? They are talking about cognitions. And they're talking about maybe the color it has or the smell it has, but they're talking about cognitions and how these cognitions moves about. And if they move about in this particular fashion, they get some kind of the sort of underlying story of what is Hume thinks is going on, right? They have an emotional reaction that they attach to something they call ethics, and then they start to order people around. You can't do this, you should do that, and so on, right? And Hume says that's completely mental, right? Just because you have an experience of this, that, and the other moving about this, that, and the other way, doesn't mean all of a sudden you can start to order people around, right? Which is basically what he's saying, and that's my standpoint at this point. He's basically saying you can't get to order people around this way, right? And he might not come up with any other solution how you get to order people around. Maybe you can't order people around. I made a video quite recently called "Don't Boss Me Around," which I actually think is the final result of meta-ethics, which is no matter what you can conjure up in your mind of abstractions and reasonings and philosophy, there is no point where that abstraction all of a sudden has to entail in you bossing me around. Creating some qualia I have to understand in a particular way, so I move myself around. Why does that follow? It doesn't. It doesn't follow from that, right? Maybe it doesn't even follow that I can boss myself around. But if I'm bossing myself around, I am inflicting it on myself. I'm deciding for myself what my philosophy is. I'm adhering to my own philosophy then, right? I mean, why would anybody take that away from me, right? So I find this to be a very good checkpoint for figuring out whether or not people are bullshitting you in their philosophy, right? Try it on for size. Try it. Let me know what you think. Does it make sense, right? I mean, I'm convinced that it makes sense. It makes very much sense to me, right? And it also points to all this. As I said, I put philosophy down there, and I didn't put it there. It belongs there, right? In abstractions. It's people when they're doing philosophy, just check it out, right? They are roaming around in their abstractions, right? It's all imagination. It's all abstraction. It's all models and theories and appeals to all kinds of abstractions. It's never an appeal to colors and sounds and taste and touch or Eiffel Tower or Beaver or soft eyes or any cognition like that. It's never, ever, right? It's just all this experience is shoved to the side, and then they are knocking themselves out in their abstractions, and then say they come up with all sorts of explanations of what, for instance, goes on before colors and sounds and smells and touch and taste, right? Just circumventing all experience because it's boring. It's everyday experience. It's so boring. Bicycles and grass lawns and trees. It's just boring every day, right? No, my abstractions, my ripples, and the big mind. And sort of, hang on, mate, right? No, there's an interdependency here, right? And you can't just circumvent that without clarifying how the hell you do that, right? In my opinion. So It's about keeping yourself on the plate and make sure that you don't, live in your, imaginary balloon and go knock yourself out in your mental cloud castles, right? You have to be anchored somewhere. Otherwise, I don't trust any of what you're saying, right? If you don't have an anchor point, right? And the qualia is the starting point, in my opinion. You can't get around it, no matter what you can bring up, right? Let's just take ontology. Well, what is that? It's a kind of philosophy. What is philosophy? Well, I'm thinking about my consciousness, maybe, right? What is your consciousness? Well, it's something like I'm thinking about what is there, for instance, right? But what is there? What do you mean by what? Yeah, well, what is a bird, for instance, right? Okay, a bird is a cognition, right? How did you get to bird? Well, because of colors. It doesn't matter what you grab onto, right? It might be a long road to get there, right? And you might go astray and say, I'm stuck somewhere in abstractions and I can't get to qualia. But then keep thinking about it, right? How did you get to it? I bet you it all comes back to qualia. This is how it works, in my opinion. The category A and B are very important. They are the ground floor of, you could almost see it as, if you think of it as a Darwinian evolution, right? If there was some kind of color, for instance, right? Maybe light and shadow, what would you call it, right? Some kind of color. It appeared, right? But there was nothing, there was no cognitions, there was no abstractions, right? It just appeared for whatever, weird reason. Let's say in a worm or whatever, something like that, right? But maybe if that color, for whatever reason, kept being there, and all of a sudden some other thing came up that, like a, what would I, an emotion. Every time I had that color, I had the worm had the emotion. What if that emotion then triggered, it moved its tail, something like that, right? The color made it have an emotion that made it wig its tail in a particular way. Every time, it's sort of, after millions and millions and millions and millions and years of freaky accidents, all of a sudden there was this three-step rocket, right, from color to emotion to action, right? And if that action at some point was actually beneficial to survival, then all the worms that could do that would be the ones that survived, right? And maybe some freaky accident later, it could actually cognize beavers and say, all those that loved the beaver would go and be eaten, and those who hated beavers, so to say, had the hating emotion, they would survive and not be eaten by beavers. So all those who were afraid of beavers, they would survive. You see how these things sort of could, in a Darwinian scenario, could evolve and be responsible for this trickle-down effect, right? And it makes sense to say that, in my opinion, in my understanding at least, that the first thing that would be appearing would be color, sound, smell, touch, and taste. Maybe not all of the 5 of them before there was the idea of beaver, for instance, but they sort of, they have simultaneously developed to some extent, right? But there wouldn't be any beavers without there would be first some kind of color, or sound, or smell, or touch, or taste. And there might even be some qualia that back in the day were there, but there's no longer there, right? Maybe the first or the latest, ocean living creatures could actually see something ultraviolet, maybe. But at some point they didn't need it, so it went away, right? And it's sort of this idea of the optimized dashboard, right? What you have access to is basically just what you need. You're not spending energy, so to say, on qualia you don't need. But because we have come so accustomed to, we have these five senses, and because we are so perfect, because we are the top of the food chain, we must have a perfect idea of what that experience is. No, not necessarily. It makes more sense to say the experience is only what makes sense to have. Makes sense. I mean, there's no idea what that would be. But without having an idea of what it is, there's very likely that even if the experience could be more fleshed out and more complicated with 3 or 4 other kinds of qualia, it might not, at the end of the day, be useful. So it would slowly disappear, right? If you are in a Darwinian scenario, right? So it's sort of the iconography idea of the experience, that if you talk about an external world, the iconography is what represents something you don't have access to in an external world, right? But it just because you call it an iconography or a dashboard that's Bernardo, doesn't mean that there must be an outside world. Because you can't get to it, the outside world, I might end the story here before we get to the 1 hour mark about that external world thing. How do you approach that? I think that, or in my philosophy, I can't get around giving understanding to the cognitions. And my understanding is my cognitions, like Earth, Eiffel Tower, Beaver, and so on, are representations of something that is beyond my experience. But I'm not going to tell you what is beyond my experience. I'm saying I'm only going to work with my cognitions, right? I have the Eiffel Tower, the beaver, the soft ice, the pizza, and so on. That's what I'm working from. I might be treating them as placeholders, right? For something beyond. But I'm not going to tell you what is beyond. And that's the important distinction. Because if you think about it, if you ask the question, and you might say, well, if I don't ask the question, I don't have the problem. You might convince me there. But if I ask the question, is there something beyond my experience? I would say I can't tell you, right? It's inaccessible, right? But that mere idea, understanding, is then I can't tell you that there isn't something beyond my experience. I can't rule it out. If I don't have access to it, I can't rule it out, right? It's the old thinking of, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? Just because I don't experience elephant right now doesn't mean that elephants don't exist. It's sort of the same kind of thinking along the same lines, right? So if I ask the question, is there something beyond my experience? I would say, I can't tell you, right? I can't tell myself. But then I can't rule out that there isn't. I can't rule out, I can't say there isn't something beyond my experience. And that's why solipsism doesn't work to me, because I can't rule out there's something beyond my experiences. So I think I have, in a sort of Pascal's wager kind of matrix, I have to take into account there must be something outside. And the best I can do is say my cognitions are representations of some inaccessible aspect of an outside. That's the best I can do. Thank you for listening. Let me have your comments. Let me know you're alive. I have the most quiet subs on YouTube. I'm convinced, right? Please shout out. Give me a shout out, right? Let me know what you think. Let me get some feedback on this, right? Otherwise, please share, like, and subscribe, and consider the board and donations, if you please. And otherwise, see you in the next one. Have a nice day.